A 200-mile missile carrying, instead of a warhead, 3 stages of solid-fuel booster rockets and Explorer. A 6-foot bullet only inches across, crammed with electronic gear.
The Interplanetary Podcast. The exploration of space for the benefit of all mankind. Your hosts here in London, Matthew Russell and Jamie Franklin.
Wow. Who was that?
It was the announcer on the TV, on a broadcast, to tell the world that the US has launched its first satellite.
Oh, what a time to be alive.
There we go. But more on that later. Before we get on to the main event of this podcast, do you want me to tell you a bit of news that's been happening this week? Because there's been quite a bit of it.
Do I? I mean, yeah, I do.
So the funniest bit of the news is what happened last night.
What happened?
So I was just about to put the kids to bed, and I allowed them to watch SpaceX launch yet another Falcon 9 with GovSat-1 on it.
Such a good dad.
Yes, I am a good dad. But they were a little bit disappointed because there was no return. There was no landing for the booster. But hilariously, even though SpaceX wanted to get rid of this particular booster, well, they didn't want to get rid of it, but it was kind of being used as an expendable booster. Particularly considering it's an old one. It's a reused one, and it's one of the Block 3 versions. So it's a really old, reused Falcon 9 booster. And they thought, well, this satellite's so heavy, and we've got to get it into an orbit that we can't bring it back down.
Yeah.
But they've managed to land it at sea, and it's just like floating around in the sea now. So they've got to go and they've got to go and salvage it. So even though they tried to get rid of it, they've now got to go and salvage it. It's just bobbing around. So Elon Musk tweeted with a picture of the booster bobbing around in the Atlantic Ocean, and he said the rocket was meant to test very high retro thrust landing in water, so it didn't hurt the drone ship. But amazingly, it has survived. We'll try to tow it back to shore.
So is there... I mean, I assume that there's going to be some damage to it.
Yeah, I think salt water probably means that thing ain't ever going to fly again.
Still pretty amazing, though.
It's amazing, yeah. And it's the first successful launch of a Falcon 9 this year, if you don't count Zuma. And who knows? Who will ever know about Zuma?
I think it's going to remain a mystery.
Yeah. I didn't allow my kids to stay up a little bit later, though, and watch a Soyuz rocket.
Such a bad dad.
I am a bad dad. Not the capital of Iraq. That's Baghdad.
Yes, that's true.
Soyuz rocket going up with a Fregat space tug up a stage, and that was carrying 11 satellites.
Space tug.
11 satellites.
11?
Russian, German, and US.
Jeez.
And that was the first flight from the Vostochny Cosmodrome, Russia's new all-spangling cosmodrome, this year, since that embarrassing failure back in November.
Well, it's nice that they've got a success here.
Yeah, particularly considering they've launched a couple of drum kits up into space, the Canopus V3 and 4 satellites, although I don't think they are drum kits, I think they're actually satellites.
Why did you say drum kits then?
Because Canopus is a make of drum kit, Jamie.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Well, I would have thought you'd have known that, being in the Indus.
No, I just don't care enough about drums.
apart from presumably
apart from
digital drums,
electric drums. Of
that's
course.
It. Yeah. I'll tell you what, though, this week also we had the launch of an Ariane 5, the first Ariane 5 launch this year.
There was a bit of a scare, wasn't there?
Just a bit. So, yeah, after 81 successes in a row, this is the first partial failure of an Ariane 5. Can you believe that?
Jeez, that's insane.
So, yeah, it was to launch the SES-14.
Yeah.
So that's a couple of numbers before the SES-16 that Falcon 9 just launched, and the Allier 3 communications satellite. And what's bizarre about this is that they lost telemetry that the tracking station in Brazil was supposed to acquire the launcher's telemetry, and it didn't. So the rockets kind of veered off course somehow. But what's more incredible is that the satellites were still deposited into some form of orbit, even though the wrong one. And they're now communicating with those satellites. And it looks like they're actually going to be okay. So, wow. And I think this is incredible, actually. To be fair, it does actually show, in some ways, it actually shows...
be breathing quite a heavy sigh of relief.
Yeah, well, oh, absolutely. These things, least of all the people that spend years building these satellites,
You'd be gutted, wouldn't you?
Literally, it's like a year and a half, 2 years work building these things. Plus the companies that pay the millions of pounds, or in some cases billions of dollars to get these things built.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to make that phone call to your investors, would you?
No, it's whole communities rely on these satellites for broadband and things like that. So it's pretty amazing. But so SES-14, that probably won't have any kind of impact on its overall mission because it can use its electric propulsion to get to the correct orbit. It'll take some time, but it will get to the correct orbit, and it won't really use up any of its lifetime doing so. The Alye 3, however, uses rocket propulsion, so liquid fuel. So in getting to the right place, it is going to use up some of its fuel, so it will shorten its operational longevity once it gets there. So it's going to have to do a lot of work to get there. So that must have been a bit of a scary moment for Ariane Space.
So
the statement from them is that they have set up an independent inquiry in conjunction with ESA. So we won't really know what happened, but they just lost telemetry. There's no even. I haven't even seen any speculation about what it could be, to be honest.
Whoa! I am wiping sweat from my brow.
Yeah. So there's going to be no delays to their up and coming launches from French Guiana.
Good.
So they're carrying on as normal, and it doesn't look like it'll affect future launches like and I big gulp here, the James Webb Telescope.
Oh, could you imagine?
I might imagine if that incident had happened with the James Webb Telescope on board. It's just like, talk Matt, about stressful.
If there's any telescope that me and you don't want to fail, it's the James Webb, isn't it?
I even now people send pictures of terrified animals and memes when talking about the launch of James Webb Telescope. It is absolutely frightening.
Matt, did you just say the word meme?
A meme.
You're such a cool dad.
Do you know what? I've known about memes ever since Richard Dawkins talked about them in some of his famous books. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. There
we go.
Meme.
Good old dorks.
Yeah. Good old the Dorkmeister. So I just wanted to... here we get Ariane 5, first launch in 1996, which unfortunately was a failure, but it's flown nearly 100 times. So over the past 20 years, as you would say.
Thankfully.
It has launched, get this, 97 flights, and only 2 have been failures and 3 partial failures.
Yeah, that's not a bad rate, is it?
No. So actually, there's the last 10 launches are now on the manifest for Ariane 5, and it will be replaced by Ariane 6. So there's 23 Ariane 5 rockets that's still to be launched until 2023, and then Ariane 6 will take over.
That's ace. Good work, chaps and chapesses.
And don't forget, Ariane 5 launched the Rosetta spacecraft into orbit safely.
How can I forget that, man?
No, you haven't.
It's me you're talking to, Papa Rocket.
Talking of other successes, Jamie.
Yeah.
Good old Opportunity has quietly been trundling around the Mars surface and has racked up 14 years this week.
14 years?
Yeah. So it's absolutely smashed it on the red planet.
Oh, that's amazing,
what
isn't it?
a faithful little robot it's been. What an amazing robot.
It's a good dog, isn't it?
I'm going to do a bit of a fox and grapes thing here.
Go on.
Do you know that? Do you know the fox and the grapes?
Oh, I thought it was the fox and the chicken and the bag of grain getting across a river.
That's also an Aesop's fable.
Oh.
But the fox and the grapes is a good one. I'm going to say this. I'm not looking forward to the Falcon Heavy launch this week.
Oh,
I think
come
it's going to be boring, Jamie. It's only a rocket, isn't it? You know, who cares? It's just 3 Falcon 9 strapped together. I don't,
Matt, you've changed.
I'm waiting for the BFR. That's what I'm waiting for. Who wants to go see Falcon Heavy?
Yeah, that's true. Can we edit those noises out, please?
No.
I've creeped myself out.
Yours is staying in.
It's what everyone's asking for, though, to be fair.
Jamie, tell the listeners where we went this week.
Well, I don't want to brag, Matt, but, we hopped over to Cologne.
Mm-hmm.
We only went to the ESA, didn't we?
We did. We went to the European Astronaut Centre.
We were like kids in a candy shop, weren't
Properly.
we? How amazing was it?
What a brilliant place. The great thing is, it wasn't even an open day. We were just sort of hanging out on a normal day.
Yeah, it's just who we know now. It's just who we chill with.
And it was just crazy when it was like going for a cup of coffee in the canteen and an astronaut strolls in and helps himself to coffee and is just wandering around. It's just like, what the heck?
Morning.
Morning. Yeah, it's morning.
I'm just off to the neutral buoyancy pool. What?
Yeah, so we're going to be...
Which was unbelievable. Should we wait to talk about that?
We are going to wait to talk about that because we've got
Let's
the boss of the neutral buoyancy pool, the man, and we'll have an interview with him coming up. Hervé, we'll have an interview with him coming up in the next couple of weeks, depending on how all pans out. And that is a great interview. Certainly,
it's really interesting, wasn't it?
It was unbelievable. What a bloke, and it was so good of him to spare like literally 30 minutes of his time talking to a couple of chumps from London. But there we go. It was brilliant.
One chump. me, Matt, it's me.
Oh, was that you? Now you asked some good questions. Yeah. I liked some of your questions.
I took one for the team. Yeah, big time. That's what I do.
To be in the heart of the European Astronaut Centre, and it's also where the DLR, not to be confused with Docklands Light Railway, it is the German space agency. That's where they're based.
That's right.
So it's in that campus. So we saw some weird buildings, didn't we? That I was insisting was
some weird buildings.
A car park.
You called one a car park, and I was right in saying that something interesting goes on in that building.
Yeah.
And what went on in that building, man?
It was things like they do sleep experiments and stuff like that, and loads of kind of like weird
pressure,
stuff.
eyeball pressure was one.
Yeah. So I'm going to look into that because that building was weird, wasn't it? It did look like a car park, you got to admit.
Didn't. It didn't.
It didn't look like a car park.
Otherwise, I'd have agreed with you rather than saying, I bet really interesting stuff goes on in there. But you know now, Matt.
I do know
not
now.
To disagree with me.
I do know now. 14 astronauts have their office at the European Astronaut Centre. All of ESA's 14 astronauts. How cool is that?
Amazing.
So, and there was the ATV there as well, that we had a little look round, and all the little training Columbus modules and stuff. Oh my God, it was so good. But we'll talk about it more. Yeah. We'll talk about it more over the next couple of weeks. Because actually, what we really want to get onto is our interview with the main man, who is what we made the whole trip for, Monsieur Tim Peake.
Get out of here.
Yeah, Tim Peake.
You interviewed Tim Peake?
ESA's first British astronaut.
I still kind of wake up going, yeah, we interviewed Tim Peake. That's how amazing is that?
That is pretty amazing.
The guy is going back to the space station in the not too distant future.
We hope. We got
a good half an hour with him, didn't we?
Yeah, so let's just have a quick rundown about Tim Peake before we play the interview. What do you reckon?
Let's do a rundown.
So, Tim Peake was chosen in May 20th, 2009 as part of the Shenanigans, which was, so that's out of 9,000 applicants, they were left with Samantha Cristoforetti, Alexander Gerst, Andreas Mogensen, Luca Barmetano, Timothy Peake, and Thomas Pesquet.
It's not a bad bunch.
That is a good bunch, isn't it? Yeah, and as we'll hear from Tim Peake, he was in the Army for 17 years.
And he flew Apache helicopters as a test pilot.
He's got a science degree in flight dynamics.
He has.
He was part of the ESA Caves mission. He was an aquanaut on Nemo 16.
Aquanaut?
He went to the International Space Station on the 15th of December 2015, which must have been one of the most watched space launches in this country of all time, I'd imagine.
It was.
Everyone in my office at John Henry's stopped and watched, and it was great.
Buzzing.
It was buzzing, wasn't it? And that mission was known as the Principia mission, of course, named after the famous book by fellow Brit Isaac Newton.
And actually, Tim mentioned him, didn't he, after one of our questions, which we won't give away.
His first meal on the ISS was a bacon sandwich and a cup of tea. I just sort of point that out, Jamie. A cup of tea.
Well, the bacon sandwich sounds nice.
A cup of tea. Yeah. And participated in a spacewalk on the ISS. And as we'll hear from our other special guest, there's a very big story around ESA astronauts and spacewalks, but we'll have to wait for that in a few weeks' time.
Absolutely. And, on the 24th of April, Matt, Peake ran the 2016 London Marathon from the ISS treadmill. And he became the first man to run a marathon from space.
Yes, not the first woman, however, because there was a woman that beat him to that. But
very true.
Yeah, in Chichester City Council on the 17th of February 2016, it was agreed unanimously to confer the freedom of the city.
Oh, bet he was relieved.
Yep, and then, you can just wander around living it large in Chichester now. Properly.
Big time. He's got the key.
Yeah, and if he comes up to the city gates, he's got the key. Boom.
This is it.
18th of June 2016, we all watched him come back down to Earth in the capsule that's now up at the Railway Museum in York. And I've seen lots of people posting pictures of that on Twitter. I'm glad you all heard about it here first on the podcast and went along. Well done, everyone.
Well done.
So shall we listen to that interview right now?
Let's do it.
Écoutez. So at the beginning of 2018, we put together a list of people that we really, really wanted to speak to this year. And Tim Peake was at the very, very top of that list. And we're peaking early because we've got you in January, which is fantastic news. So today we're joined by our very special guest, ESA astronaut and fellow Brit, Tim Peake.
Good morning.
Good morning indeed. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you got into the astronauting game?
Sure. Well, my background was as a military pilot. I loved aviation throughout my teenage years. I was in the cadet force at school, and they had both an Air Force section and an Army section. And I was in a bit of a dichotomy because I loved everything about the Army, but I also loved flying. So I was in the Army section. I would go off flying with the Air Force section at the weekends, and that really inspired me to want to become a pilot. I was very fortunate to have, to pass all the medical tests and to be able to have a great 17-year career with the Army Air Corps flying helicopters. And for about the last 6 or 7 years, I was a test pilot as well, primarily flying Apache helicopters, but as a test pilot, of course, you get qualified on a whole range of different aircraft, and I got to fly over 30 different aircraft, which was brilliant, including fast jets, heavy transport aircraft, and what have you. And then, as often happens, in the military, as an officer, your career path is always leaning towards a desk job and management positions and promotion, and I wanted to stay flying. I wanted to be in the cockpit. That's where I loved what I loved doing. And so for me, I made the transition to become a civil test pilot, and I went to work for Augusta-Westland Helicopters down in Yeovil as a test pilot. Now, at the same time, the European Space Agency was having its selection process. And that's the moment at which the door really opened for me to become an astronaut, because prior to that, of course, I'd loved everything to do with space. It'd been a huge inspiration to me. It'd been a huge part of my life as well. And working as a test pilot, you work very closely with the space industry. But it wasn't until ESA had that selection in 2008 that the door opened, not just for the UK, but all the member states in the European Space Agency. Prior to that, of course, if your country wasn't contributing into the human spaceflight program, you couldn't become an astronaut, which is why our first British astronaut, Helen Sharman, she had to fly under a sort of commercially sponsored program rather than a government-led program.
Right. And actually that leads on to the next question, because when you go back to the ISS, are you potentially going to be on a commercial craft? And if so, do you think it will be Dragon or Starliner? And if so, would you be helping to construct the Deep Space Gateway potentially?
Yeah, a really interesting question. So, yes to your first question. If I get another mission back to the International Space Station, which I hope I do, it will be on a commercial crew. And the reason for that is we're a European Space Agency. We actually barter our flights to the space station through NASA. And currently we have Alex Guest flying later this year on a Soyuz rocket. And then Luca Parmitano will fly in 2019 on a Soyuz rocket as well. But we expect Luca to be the last European astronaut on a Soyuz rocket under the current framework agreement. Right. So all future European astronauts after Luca are likely to fly on commercial. Now, as to whether that will be Boeing or SpaceX, I don't know, and I wouldn't comment even if I did know. I mean, they're obviously they're hugely ambitious programs, and you see what SpaceX is doing. They've been delivering the Dragon spacecraft to the space station with cargo. In fact, I had the privilege of capturing a Dragon spacecraft full of cargo, they're both online. The programs have slipped slightly, but they are both online for a very good test program in 2019, and we hope that they will start delivering crew to the space station in 2019 as well.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're a fan of Russian engineering, and obviously you had all the faith in the world, obviously, for the Soyuz launch. Would you be slightly more apprehensive with a whole new system?
No, I wouldn't be any more or less apprehensive. There's inherent risk in any rocket launch, and yes, the Soyuz has got a fantastic safety record, but it's also the Soyuz and the Progress have had their fair share of problems, and in fact, a couple of the more recent problems on the Progress spacecraft, or they actually happened on the Soyuz rocket that carries the Progress spacecraft, to put it more accurately. And those problems could have occurred on a crewed version. Yeah. It was just lucky that at the time it was carrying a Progress supply vehicle and not the crew vehicle. So on a new commercial spacecraft, of course, there's risk in any new program. But as I said, Boeing's got an excellent track record in terms of being with the space industry, and SpaceX as well. They've come on so far, and what they're doing is absolutely phenomenal. And the Dragon spacecraft now has got a very good, robust record behind it. So no, as a test pilot, yes, there's always going to be risk involved, but I don't think any more so.
Right. Well, one of our guests last summer was Mike Foale, who was saying that he was slightly worried about the ISS being decommissioned, and now there's rumours that the Trump administration are saying that there's no more funding from 2025. What's your feelings on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there is an area of concern there, but there's also an area of opportunity. And it's a little bit like the space shuttle retirement in 2011. How do you build something like SLS at the same time as supporting a space shuttle program, at the same time as supporting an international space station program? If we want to go on, and if we want to build the Deep Space Gateway, if we want to be serious about lunar exploration, something has to give. The money will only stretch so far. And the plan has always been to hand over the space station to the commercial sector. Now, the Trump administration is obviously wanting to accelerate that process. So I think the risk here is that 2025 is a little bit too soon, and the commercial sector is not fully up and running, not in a position to take over the running of the space station. And that transition period, we have to obviously we basically have to ensure that we still have access to low Earth orbit for our astronauts at the same time as we're pushing forward to the Deep Space Gateway. So that has to be done carefully. But the plans are underway to both provide access to low Earth orbit and the Deep Space Gateway at the same time.
Apollo, obviously, it's in the middle of its kind of 50th anniversary. We just had the 50th anniversary of Apollo 5, and we're heading towards more significant ones. In the year 2078, what would you like to have been achieved in space, i.e. 50 years from now?
In 2078, so I think that I would like to know that we have permanent habitation on the lunar surface, with great research being done there, also exploring the resources that we can use for future space exploration from the lunar surface, and also to assist with life back on Earth. I'd like to think that we have a presence on Mars as well in 50 years. I think that's very achievable. A smaller presence, but also permanently occupied presence on Mars. And I'd like to think that we have, technologies, propulsion technologies that will be cutting our transit time to Mars down to a matter of 1 to 2 months, as opposed to 7 to 8 months. So that really is going to be key for sustainability on Mars and for access to Mars, is the propulsion technologies and radiation shielding, of course, but these are not insurmountable problems.
Well, sure. Now here's one from my 5-year-old nephew Adam. He said, how big does the Earth look from space?
How big does it look from space? Well, of course, it depends how far away you are from space. And from the International Space Station, it still looks pretty big, because you're only at 400 kilometers, which is why we're hurtling around at nearly 18,000 miles per hour. I was speaking recently to Al Warden and his Apollo experience. And of course, not only did he fly to the moon and see what the Earth looked like from 400,000 kilometers away, where you can cover up the Earth with your thumb, in a window. It's that small. But he also got to do a deep spacewalk on the way back from the moon. And he said that was incredible because, of course, the trajectory that the Apollo module takes when it comes from the moon back to Earth, there's a point where it's not a straight line. You're obviously flying a trajectory to intercept the Earth. And so there was a point where he was doing a spacewalk and the moon was in one direction and then the Earth was off in another direction. And he was almost forming a triangle and seeing both locations so remote and feeling, outside a spacecraft in a spacesuit, just feeling like the most remote person in the universe. So yeah, the Earth can, I'm sure, for Apollo astronauts, I'm sure the Earth looked very, very small indeed.
We got the chance to interview him a year ago, and one of the questions was what food and drink was he most looking forward to having when he got back, and he said vodka and spaghetti. what would
at the same time? Mine was beer and pizza.
It's the English equivalent.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah, he actually told us the story about the deep space spacewalk and how he'd drawn what it looked like and had to do that from memory back at NASA because he didn't couldn't take a picture of it.
Yes.
And I thought that's incredible. But is that something that you would relish at a deep space?
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. No. If my next mission was an opportunity to be involved in the Deep Space Gateway program, I would absolutely relish it. Yes. And the great news is, of course, Europe is providing the service module for that. In fact, later this year, we deliver the first European service module for the Orion spacecraft. And so we very much hope to have European astronauts flying on some of those early missions to the Deep Space Gateway. That would be an incredible mission to be involved in.
Absolutely.
So, Tim, what would you say is the space industry's biggest danger right now?
I'm not sure there are many dangers at the moment. The space industry has a very exciting future ahead. We have to obviously, in terms of managing government programs and commercial programs, we have to get that balance right and that integration right. But we have experience, and we've been talking about, Dragon and the space station. Cygnus as well has been involved in delivering cargo. And we're now looking at companies like Axiom and Bigelow. We have a Bigelow module attached to the space station, and how we can make that transition. So I think these partnerships are going to be fundamental. And as we look not just to low Earth orbit, but we look at how we can have commercial partnerships involved in the deep space exploration, in the lunar missions and in the Mars missions as well. That's worked very well with robotic exploration, of course, and we now just need to do the same with human exploration. But no, I think the space industry is going to have a very exciting period ahead, and as we things such as propulsion technologies which are improving, things like AI is and digital technology is constantly improving. We're constantly finding new lightweight materials. This is all hopefully going to build better spacecraft and bring the cost of access to space down as well. And cost of access to space means it becomes a greater opportunity for more people on Earth. So I think it's only opportunities as we look forward.
Sure. Where do you think ESA and UK Space should be concentrating their efforts Is there a place where we sit that is beneficial to because it seems to be a very international effort, space, really. Yeah. And is there a real thing that you see ESA and UK space being part of?
So that's a very important question, and it's a key question, because yes, it's about international partnerships, collaborations, etc. But we need to make sure that we are on the critical path in those partnerships. And I mentioned about the service module to Orion. That's why it's so important for Europe to be involved in that aspect, because that is clearly the critical path to a spacecraft and to that exploration program. But it's also for the Deep Space Gateway. We need to have an absolute fundamental part in that, so that we remain involved, so that the European Space Agency remains involved and has access to those programs. And the UK Space Agency, as part of, and the UK as a member state of the European Space Agency, of course, can contribute to those programs and to be a part of those programs, and that's extremely important as well. But at the same time, I do think it's important for Europe to look at the areas of risk in terms of not being left out in the cold, and thinking about what capabilities should we be improving for ourselves. And clearly, launcher, we have Ariane 6 rocket, which is a fantastic launcher, but we have no human spaceflight capability. There are opportunities coming up in the future that could potentially give us that. For example, Sierra Nevada with the Dream Chaser Ariane 6 combination suddenly gives Europe a fantastic capability into low Earth orbit for our astronauts to visit a commercial space station potentially, or being involved again in a commercial space station partnership beyond the International Space Station. So I think we do have to be very careful about looking at where Europe's weaknesses are in terms of our access to space and the programs that we're involved in, and make sure that we get involved in the right places in these partnerships.
Yeah, you preempted one of my questions about the native human spaceflight program, but that's really interesting about the Dream Chaser on Ariane. With the UK, do you see us having a spaceport with a small satellite launch capability? Do you think that's around the corner? Because that's it's been touted quite a bit.
It has been, and it's again a very, very important development, and a very interesting development. Yes, I think in time that will come. And of course, it's fantastic at the moment that really the UK is leading Europe in terms of its getting the legislation in place that will permit that. We have some fantastic potential locations in the UK for spaceports, in particular suiting polar orbits, and for small satellite launches, either vertical or horizontal launch. Then it's a great location, and we need to make it attractive for commercial companies to come to the UK and to participate in building the infrastructure for the spaceport and building up that industry. Yes, so I think the short answer is there's definitely the opportunity there, and we need to continue to make sure that in the UK that they're well positioned within Europe to do that.
So this one's a tough question, but if you could have dinner with two people, alive or dead.
Not us two.
Not us, of course. No, that's the first choice. But who would they be? Anyone who you would love to sit down with?
Goodness me, I think a conversation between Newton and Einstein would be would be absolutely brilliant. Could you imagine sitting at a table? But no, that would be brilliant to be able to talk to Newton and Einstein.
One thing we asked our listeners was we created a playlist of songs about space. And we got over 100, which kind of surprised us, all these ones coming in on Facebook. Is there any song about space that you kind of hold close?
There are loads. I mean, I did the Space Rocks competition for the Principia mission, so I found it a struggle to narrow that down to just 75 tracks, which all had something to do about space. So I wouldn't want to single anyone out in particular. But no, I love all sorts of different music. And
Don't Stop Me Now was a very good choice, by the way.
I thought that, it was
the Queen song 39, didn't you?
39, yes. Right. That was the Queen song that made it onto our space song list.
Right. Okay. Brilliant.
Because it's about space.
What would you say is the most fascinating experiment that you did on the ISS?
There were lots of different experiments that interested me for different reasons. Some of the experiments that require an awful lot of astronaut interaction, of course, either with a guinea pig, with a subject of the experiment. So, of course, we're going to find that interesting. But also some experiments that require very little input from the astronaut, but they're fascinating science. For example, the electromagnetic levitator in the Columbus module. I mean, we're designing and manufacturing alloys, metal alloys, that you simply cannot manufacture back here on Earth, that have amazing qualities in terms of lightweight, strong materials. And in the Japanese laboratory, we're doing the same, but with composite materials. Requires very little interaction, actually, from an astronaut point of view, but fascinating science. And then from our point of view, I mean, one of the ones I love doing was the airway monitoring experiment, where we're investigating lung physiology. It's going to have big impact for asthma sufferers here on Earth, for example, and using not only the microgravity environment, but reduced pressure. So we went into the airlock, we took the pressure down in the airlock, and that was a very, very complex experiment. So it's very, very satisfying when you can run complex science on board the space station and everything works, perfectly according to plan. That's a good day in the office. Yeah, right. So some of those experiments were very, very good to do.
With those experiments, presumably you have a lot of people on the ground giving you instructions on how to do those experiments. If the same thing was happening, say, at Deep Space Gateway or something even further out orbiting Mars, how would that has that logistics been thought through or?
It has been thought through, yes, and that's something we're using the space station as a technology test bed, if you like, for that, and also a procedural test bed. But it's very easy in low Earth orbit to get into the habit and the luxury of just being able to call ground. Right. And we have a problem, call ground. And not only can we call ground, but hey, we got a video link as well, a real-time video link, so you can actually show them the problem you've got, and you can have people on the ground talking you through solutions, etc., which is great for making the space station an incredibly efficient environment to work in. But it's not great for getting people into the mindset of a 20-minute delay when we're on a deep space mission. So we use space analogs a lot. I mean, when I was doing the 12-day underwater mission, NEMO mission, for that entire mission, we had a 90-second communication delay. And even just with a 90-second delay, things such as medical emergencies become impossible to manage talking to mission control. The crew has to be completely self-sufficient. So when you go into an order of several minutes of worth of delay, that level of autonomous operation is only going to increase. So there are plans to use the space station as a test bed for that as well. But actually, our job as astronauts on the space station is to execute procedures accurately and efficiently. And for the majority of the time, the procedures have gone through so many checks before they actually even make it on board the space station, including people like myself now here on Earth as flown astronauts. We will get involved in checking them. That by the time the astronauts execute them on board, in most circumstances, there are very few questions anyway. Things run pretty smoothly.
Actually, it's interesting you mentioned about being able to kind of Skype back to people on Earth. One of an event that me and Matt went to a couple of years ago is Mars Nation, where people get together from other industries, not inside space, to try and work on problems. And one problem is mental health in space, and the idea that being, segregated from everyone else is a real issue potentially with people who might be going to Mars, and how we would combat that. And lots of people came up with different ideas, and one was kind of a pet seal, was it, that you could interact with, so that you feel like you were looking after something. One was VR that was simulating weather, because I know you missed rain and weather, didn't you? So is there anything that you think really helped you when you were really missing being down here?
It's a very good point, and I think that we do need to think very carefully about those kind of issues. VR is a great tool. And in particular, when I was running the London Marathon, there was the company that did the digital London Marathon, Run Social, had the app which I was going to run, which was so that I would be running with avatars through the streets of London and listening to the crowds cheering and everything. So that was a huge morale boost, and that was a fantastic thing to do. But they also said, "Hey Tim, give us a couple of your favourite running routes, and we'll film them and put them into the app as well." So I had a couple of brilliant routes in the Scottish Highlands that I love to run along, and they filmed them for me, and I was amazed at the benefits of that in terms of psychological well-being, because I could use them on the bike machine. So whether I wanted to go mountain biking or go for a run, suddenly I was in the Scottish Highlands, and you can just zone out for 45 minutes and just go on the most fantastic run, and it just puts you into a completely different mindset.
How does it work planning with that? Like, do you kind of say, okay, well, this is our mission today, these are the experiments that we're doing, and then we've got 3 hours off today, so I'm going to do an hour running kind of thing?
No, the fitness training is very much a scheduled part of your daily activity, and because there are 6 crew on board and only a limited number of exercise devices, our fitness time is very strict in time of preparation, and then we also have to get a mix of cardiovascular and strength training. So on one day, you normally try and do one cardio session, one strength a day. It might be the bike one day, the treadmill the next day, but always the strength training at some point.
Did you have a favourite exercise?
Not particularly. I loved all I loved all the exercises. The T2 treadmill is not the easiest to run on. Yeah. So whilst I
remember seeing you doing them, I was thinking, how easy is that?
Yeah. So whilst I love running, anything more than about 45 minutes gets quite painful with the harness system there. Yeah. Most astronauts love the ARED, which is our weight training exercise, and I think just because it feels good to put weight on your shoulders, and I mean things like squat thrust, which I don't particularly enjoy down here on Earth, but actually it feels really good in space, in weightlessness, to just get that weight on your spine, and that it felt very, very nice. And so I used to like working out on the ARED device.
And this is a tough one. What would you say the best advice you've ever received is?
Look out the window.
Of course.
No, it's funny. I mean, Helen Sharman actually said that to me before I launched, and she said, you take time to enjoy it for yourself as well. It's very important, because most of the time you're working up there, and even when you have the opportunity to go to the window, you're thinking, I've got to get this photograph, this shot, maybe it's the pyramids or it's something you've been waiting for. And there are very few opportunities where you can just go to the window with no camera, no nothing, and just float there and look and just enjoy it for yourself.
Well, I think we've been told that this is the last question, so thank you so much. Thank you. Incredible.
Thank you, guys. Great talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
What a geezer is Tim Peake.
He's the man, isn't he?
He is the man. He was what a fantastic, he took the time to come and talk to us.
He took the time, he signed some stuff. We got Principia badges.
Yes, we got he came
T-shirts, ESA T-shirts.
Yeah, he came back and was really
goodies.
He was really nice to us. He went off and got some load of goodies. We were actually sort of told beforehand that it was like a bit kind of faux pas to get stuff signed and stuff. It was a bit more of a sign of professional meeting. But he did go off. I thought we were going to get into trouble when he went off and started signing stuff.
I know. I was thinking,
no, don't show the others.
Tim, can you tell them that this we didn't ask, please?
It was good, wasn't it?
It was absolutely brilliant, and really, really pleased that he was as amazing as we thought he was going to be.
Yeah, there was definitely a few people to thank for this trip.
Really was.
Our absolute hero, Julio Aprea, just been a complete legend.
Just a bona fide absolute legend, and it wouldn't have been possible without him. And of course, Antonio, who was our third interview.
Yeah, so Antonio is also just brilliant. And what a walking encyclopedia. I learnt so many things as we just walked around the internet.
Scarily intelligent.
Can't forget. I like the way when he was talking about the International Space Station, like on stuff that I was like, oh my God, I've not heard any of this stuff before. And it was like, I think he was assuming that we knew all this stuff, and it was just like, man, there is so much stuff about this, and the incredible realisation of how much ESA have put into the International Space Station. We just don't shout. We don't shout from the roofs enough about it.
No idea. And Matt, we've got to also thank Alessandra, and again, wouldn't have been able to make it happen without her. So, tip of the cap to all of those three incredible people.
Yes, they're also kind to us, and we really hope to get down to the European Astronaut Centre again.
They'll probably give us a key now, won't they?
We'll probably get the key.
Like Peake's just got,
So we're going to take our mission to up the fantastic people of ESA. What a fantastic bunch. I want to just cover one last thing, Jamie, because this week, in fact, yesterday, 60 years ago to the day, the Americans launched a Juno 1, and a lot of people think it was a Jupiter C, but it wasn't. It was a Juno 1, a modified Jupiter C. And they launched, on top of that, the first scientific instrument into space, or USA's first satellite. So this became the third satellite ever after Sputnik and Mutnik by the USSR, of course. But yeah, 60 years. So 60 years ago, this week, is the start of the space race.
Happy anniversary.
Yeah. And of course, von Braun was very much involved with all of this, designing the Juno and getting this instrument into space. And one fantastic fact that Antonio told us when we were looking at little model rockets, and I pointed out, of course, that the black arrow was missing. But anyway, so he pointed out that the letters UE on the Juno 1 stood for the number rocket and how that worked. And I thought that was really interesting. So Huntsville was where these things were being flown from. So they used the letters in Huntsville to represent the numbers on the letters on the side of the rockets, so that the Soviets had no idea where they were in the amount of rockets that they'd been launching and building. How cool is that?
It was pretty clever.
Yeah, so UE was the lettering on the side of the Juno 1 that launched the Explorer1, and that stands for 29. You can work that out by writing the word Huntsville and leaving out the duplicate letters. It's fantastic.
Quick maths.
An Explorer1 was a £30 satellite. It was designed by a Mr. James A. Van Allen. Now, that will give you a clue as to what happened next. Is that its main four instruments that it had on board, they discovered the Van Allen radiation belts.
VARAB.
Which must have been quite a shock. Hey?
Absolutely.
And we have Explorer1, the very first proper scientific instrument in space, 60 years ago, that's discovered the Van Allen belts. It was very, very important discovery, of course. Well, more than important, extremely important discovery, which just goes to show how important it is that we have space exploration.
And little did they know that it would go on to fuel conspiracy theorists across the globe.
So well done, Dr. James Van Allen, and your amazing sensors. There was even a little acoustic detector that was like a little tiny microphone, crystal transducer, and that which detected micrometeorites hitting the side of the spacecraft.
No way.
Yeah.
Sweet.
They could work out how many kind of micrometeorites are out there in space as well. There was, that's how cool is that? Temperature sensors and things like that.
There's one or two.
And the Geiger counter that was on board, most of the time it spent saturated, i.e. above its kind of level, because it was like, oh my God, there's loads of radiation out here. Unbelievable. And all this, the 60th anniversary, was marked by a amazing, as was predicted on our predictions for 2018, we predicted the second full moon of the month, which, as we know, only happens once in a blue moon. And you went out to look at it, didn't you? Because it was unbelievably bright.
It was the brightest moon I've seen some moons, Matt.
But that was bright, wasn't it?
This was the brightest I've ever seen. It really hurt to look at it.
It was actually unbelievably bright. But, of course, for some people around the world, they got to saw not only the blue moon, but they got to see it go red when there was the blood red lunar eclipse. So
well, gels.
So in some ways, I wonder if NASA launched the Explorer1 knowing that the 60th anniversary is going to be so brilliant.
It's just incredible.
So thanks very much, everyone, for listening to this momentous podcast.
Hey, Matt, if we've got some new listeners tonight, because obviously we interviewed the big dog, Tim Peake, what can they do to listen again and subscribe?
Well, they can wander off to www.interplanetary.org.uk, well, they'll find a load of convenient links to either iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Patreon, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. What? All those things. You can go and check us out on any platform.
How social are we?
But to be honest, all you really need to do is just type in the Interplanetary Podcast into Google, and you'll find us all over the shop.
And you know what will happen? You'll type in INTER, and it'll basically just come up and say, "Do you want the Interplanetary Podcast like everyone else?"
Yeah, exactly.
It won't. You'll have to type the whole thing. But listen, that's where we're aiming to. That's my goal.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're halfway there. That's what I say.
Whoa.
Jamie.
Yeah?
The Interplanetary Podcast. Putting the ace back into space. Oh, I tell you what, Jamie, as well.
What?
The one bit of merch that we're selling quite a bit of is our Rocket Equation T-shirt.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
You mean there's other geeks...
There's other geeks that want to wear the Rocket Equation. So, go to our merch store and check out our Rocket Equation T-shirt. Very popular. Very popular.
You can get a merch store.
Stickers. You can get phone cases. You can even have it as your duvet. Imagine that, a Rocket Equation duvet.
How have I got a space merchandise store and I'm still single? I just don't get it. Oh, God. I think I better go and just cry myself to sleep.
I think it's because you're living the bachelor life because of your space merch store.
Yeah, I mean, all the guys with girlfriends and wives are probably so jealous, aren't they?
Big time.
Yeah. All right, Matt. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure, and thank you guys for listening. You know what to do.
No, not just thank you.
Oh.
Thank you for listening.
Blimey, yeah. And as Tim wrote for my 5-year-old nephew fan, Adam, he wrote, "Dear Adam, aim high, Tim Peake."
Wow.
And I'd like you guys to all aim high, including you, Matt.
As John Anderson said, shoot high, aim low. Never really understood that lyric. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.